Cool. Hey everybody, my computer's being all weird. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Coffee and Coaching. For anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Liv and I am a triathlon coach for our Melbourne squad. I don't know if the camera's suddenly gone blurry. Hopefully that's a bit better. Anyway, welcome back to Coffee and Coaching for another week. I apologise in advance if there is any barking in the background of this video. We just recently last week, we got a little guide dog puppy, so she's 9 weeks old and downstairs at the moment. So hopefully we won't have any barking, but fingers crossed, we should be fine. But yeah, welcome back to this week's episode of Coffee and Coaching. Today we're going to be touching on a concept that we know is present in so many people's lives, both just in general life and in sport. So we're going to be talking about imposter syndrome. So we'll cover what it is, as well as some tips to hopefully help you overcome it. And we see women suffer from imposter syndrome at training in our Melbourne squad, and we hear about women who train with us online who struggle with imposter syndrome as well. So if you relate to feeling this way, then you're definitely not alone. And hopefully today's chat will give you, a few tips and tricks to help you manage it moving forward. So we'll start off with what is imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome can affect us in all areas of life. A lot of people will experience it within a work environment, but today I'm going to discuss it within sport and triathlon specifically. So, have you ever been on the start line of a race or in the middle of a group ride and thought to yourself, I shouldn't be here, I'm not good enough, or all these other people are better than me? Or do you ever feel as though you don't deserve to be successful or you don't deserve to perform well? Let me know if you've ever experienced those thoughts in the comments section. If you have just started triathlon, maybe you feel underqualified in terms of your fitness or your level of experience, and that leads you to feeling uncertainty. It leads to feelings of not quite being up to the task, or that someone else should be doing what you're doing, but definitely not you. If this sounds familiar, then it's likely that you have experienced imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome is an internal belief that you are inadequate, incompetent, or underqualified. You fear that you'll be found out or exposed as a fraud. Sometimes you feel like your abilities have been overestimated by others and you'll be found out as being not that good as an athlete. And it can prevent people from attributing their success to themselves and cause them to attribute it to things like luck, circumstance, or someone else's misfortune. Basically, it can sabotage your long-term growth, your happiness, and it's a way of holding yourself back. So, is any of this sounding familiar to those who are listening? If you've experienced feeling a little bit like this, then let me know in the comment section. I know that I definitely have, both, in general life, but particularly in sport as well. So I think we can all agree that triathlon is quite an intimidating sport, or we feel that the label triathlete is really only fitting for those who, are winning races or physically appear as that stereotypical image of an athlete that we have in our head, when in fact, triathlete is just a term to describe anyone who's involved in the sport of triathlon. A really common experience that I see in the girls who train in the Melbourne squad is, or online, is those getting involved in triathlon maybe in their 30s or 40s for the first time. And this can be the first time that they've really prioritised their own fitness, their own fitness goals, or maybe the first time that they've really been involved in sport ever, or at least in the last few years. And one of our Melbourne squad members, Sally, recently wrote an article for us about her experience with imposter syndrome. And she mentioned that even though she was part of a very encouraging squad filled with very, very supportive women, she sometimes felt like she didn't quite deserve to be there, that she didn't deserve the support or encouragement she received from the group, and that she felt like an imposter in an athlete's world. She said that she was never an athlete as a kid, so why would she be one as an adult? And that's just a little snapshot inside her internal dialogue, and it's probably something that a lot of us can relate to. Maybe it's not exactly the same, but you can probably draw similarities to what I just described there and what you've thought or has gone through your own head at times. And I guess it's interesting because while that is maybe what's going on inside our head, it is so different to what those of us external to that person are thinking about her, because I, for one, think it's so much more inspiring to see someone working really hard in a sport that they have no experience in, particularly if they don't have that history as a sporty kid growing up. It is inspiring to see someone work really hard to conquer their fears of swimming in the open water or conquer their fears of riding on the road in cleats. It is inspiring to see someone pick themselves up after they've had a couple of falls, and it's inspiring to see someone overcome all of those mental barriers to cross the finish line of a triathlon with a smile on their face. And in my opinion, overcoming all of those hurdles makes someone so much more inspiring and so much more relatable than, you know, someone who comes in, it all goes perfectly, and they don't face any issues and they can swim, ride and run super speedy at the drop of a hat. It's not relatable, and it definitely doesn't lift people up anywhere near as much as the alternative does. So let's move on now to identifying some ways we can overcome that imposter syndrome. For most people, overcoming it isn't as simple as just, you know, clicking your fingers and deciding, okay, I'm not going to feel that way anymore. If you can do that, then bravo. But most of us won't be able to change things quite that quickly. As I mentioned before, imposter syndrome, you know, it's a way of thinking. It's our internal dialogue telling us that we're not good enough, we can't do something, or we don't deserve to be here, etc. So overcoming imposter syndrome involves really reworking how we think and kind of rewiring our brains so that we change the way we think about and evaluate the situations and environments we are in. So it does take a conscious effort, and you do need to, you know, put in the hard yards and put in a little bit of effort so that over time, having a more positive internal dialogue becomes more automatic for you. All right, so I'm just going to go through a few tips and tricks that may help you deal with imposter syndrome if it is something that is impacting you. So number one, we're going to touch on the topic of comparison. And this is, you know, quite a simple way to hopefully reduce some of your feelings of imposter syndrome, and that's to limit your access to comparison and to avoid unnecessary self-evaluation. So for example, things like taking your Garmin off at training and training without data and statistics in front of you the whole time. Another one is to delete or just remove the Strava app from your phone if it's something that you engage with quite a lot. You know the saying, comparison is the root of all evil. If you are guilty of looking at others or looking at what other people are doing and comparing yourself negatively to them, try to restrict the opportunity that you have to do that. For me personally, I find that I'm an incredibly harsh critic of myself, so I don't have Strava on my phone, and I try to avoid using data when I can. I just find that being bombarded with all the details of what everyone else is doing just makes me often feel bad about myself, so I prefer not to see it, or just prefer not to have it in my face all of the time. If you can, try and keep your focus more internal rather than worrying about how you compare to those around you or those on the internet where there's so much more room for comparison, it can help to reduce the opportunity for feeling like an imposter. Another quick point on comparison before we move on is just to be really conscious of who you are comparing yourself with. So if you're a beginner in triathlon, you know, there's no point comparing yourself with someone who's been in the sport for 4 or 5 years, who's, you know, doing Ironmans and has all of the gear. It's so unfair to yourself to do that. And it's never going to make you feel good, because of course they're better than you, of course they're faster than you, they've been doing this for so much longer. So yeah, try and be conscious if you are making comparisons. Is it actually a fair comparison, or is it, you know, always destined to result in disappointment, because it's completely unfair to do that to yourself. The next point is to take control of your self-talk. So people with imposter syndrome have quite negative thought patterns which they keep coming back to again and again and again. So the first thing is to actually become aware of your self-talk and acknowledge it. So what are you actually saying to yourself in those moments where you're not feeling great? And then you want to challenge those thoughts and try to reframe them in a much more neutral way. So an example is, if you're constantly telling yourself, I'm too slow, everyone is so much faster than me, try and replace that with, I may not be fast enough yet, but everyone starts somewhere. And every time I turn up to training, I'm taking a step in the right direction to improve and become faster. okay? So it's okay to have that negative thought, but try and recognize it and counteract it with a more neutral one that's much more constructive and, yeah, a lot more beneficial for your own self-confidence. Positive mantras, another really great way to control your internal dialogue. A mantra is a phrase or a word that you can repeat inside your head or even express vocally. I'm a massive fan of mantras. Anyone who saw my bike before my first half Ironman would have seen it, the front of it absolutely covered in little notes written on pink sports tape that I'd stuck on the front of my bike, so that when I was down in my TT bars, I was looking down at all of these like positive affirmations that I'd written there, or quotes or words that meant something to me and encouraged me to stay in a positive mindset. One of my favourite quotes is, "Whether I think I can or I think I can't, I'm right," which reminded me on the bike that if I wanted to race well, I had to believe that I could, and I had to stay positive. So everyone has their own favourite quotes. I recommend writing down some positive self-talk phrases or words that mean a lot and inspire you. If, having them on your equipment's a great one, so you can have that little reminder mid-training. However, maybe, if you're someone who struggles to get to training in the morning because, you're so anxious or worried about it, try writing, those phrases or positive self-talk words out and sticking them somewhere where you'll see them in the morning, maybe on the mirror, so that as you're getting ready, you can vocalize that positive self-talk and hopefully it will help to shift your mindset heading into the training session and just get your morning started in a bit of a better way. And it will help to reframe your thinking. Tip number 3 is to own your success. So this can be a little bit of a hard one, or I find it to be anyway, but we really want to throw out the idea that being proud of yourself or being deserving of success is being arrogant, because it is definitely not. People with imposter syndrome are often really quick to attribute their success to being a fluke, rather than recognizing that it was actually their own hard work that got them there. So when praise or success does come your way, try to accept it and acknowledge the things that you did along the way to help make that achievable. This is something that I can be terrible at. I think it's definitely a warped idea that acknowledging your success makes you sound arrogant. It definitely should not be how we feel. And I think women in particular have a bit of a tendency to do this. In an attempt to remain humble or gracious, you push back any sort of kind compliment that implies that you've excelled at something. Perfect example was at Ironman WA at the end of last year. I won my age group, and I think pretty much every single time someone congratulated me that day, I would say, "Oh, it's only because I'm in the young age group, it's easier there aren't as many people, etc, etc, etc." And, yes, maybe those things are true, but what's also true is that I trained really hard for that event and I pushed myself really hard on race day so that I would have a good race. So I should have been able to just say thank you and accept, the praise that person was giving me. So I look back on that now and I'm like, face palm. So whilst it may feel a little bit uncomfortable at first, try to accept the wins that come your way and don't constantly brush them aside as being, too small or whatever. You've got to celebrate the little wins and the big wins along the way. If you do want to get started straight away on working on your, imposter syndrome tendencies, maybe take some time to actually just sit down today and write a list of all the things that you've achieved so far. If we're talking about triathlon, maybe it's the little wins you've had so far in your experience in the sport. And these don't have to be massive things. They don't have to be winning races or whatever. It can be simply, I turned up to this swimming session even though I was really scared to do so, or I completed my first long ride today, or I made it up a hill that I used to have to walk up, or I got a PB, or I ticked off a goal race, whatever it may be. Write them down and take some time to actually reflect on the success that you have had before then moving forward. All right. Next tip is don't compare your internal feelings with someone else's external appearance. So when you're caught up in your own feelings of uncertainty and doubt, it can be very, very easy to assume that you are the only one feeling that way. You don't belong because everyone else around you is very confident and everyone else around you knows exactly what they're doing, right? Just because someone looks like they've got it all together on the outside does not mean that they feel that way at all. And there's a very, very high chance that they're either feeling as you are now, or that they have felt the way you are earlier on in their experience, so they can relate to you. Perfect example is in the Melbourne squad. I'd say 95% of people that have trained with us have been complete beginners, and those who stick at it gradually improve. They gradually upgrade their bikes, they gradually, accumulate a collection of lycra and whatnot. Me, for example, when I first started training with the squad, I was on my dad's very, very old, heavy, rusty hybrid bike. I had none of the gear. I rode in my runners. I had a massive bright blue helmet. I had to walk my bike up lots of hills because I hadn't sat on a bike in 10 years and I was very, very cycling unfit. But fast forward 4 years, and I've got a beautiful time trial bike now. I own some cycling kit and I can ride up some hills. So, if someone was to see that now, they'd probably assume, oh, she's got it all together, or she's always been good at that, or she doesn't know how I feel, which is absolutely not the case. I remember very, very clearly how nervous I was when I started, how I felt not knowing anything, and how sometimes self-conscious I felt not knowing anything at all. So 95% of people have been a complete beginner. They know how it feels to be unsure and nervous and anxious. So just because they may look like they've got it together on the outside, don't feel like they can't relate to how you're feeling on the inside too, okay? All right, I've got 2 short little points to go. One is just to talk to others. So another strategy is just to talk to other people in the sport. If you have joined a squad to train with, talk to the other members of the group, listen to their stories and their experiences. And what you'll likely find is you're actually not alone in how you feel. Knowing that you're surrounded by other people who understand and relate to your experience is very, very comforting. I think we all like knowing that we're not alone in our insecurities and whatnot. So talk to others, engage with others, and you'll probably be surprised with the amount of support that comes your way. Last but not least, my last piece of advice is to stick at it. And I know that this may sound a little bit overly simplified. However, at the end of the day, the more experience you have doing something, the more confident you get doing it. And even though it might be hard, just keep turning up to training, keep turning up to races, because the more you do, the better you will get at it. And the more involved you'll feel in the community, and the easier it will be for your brain to accept that, hey, you do actually belong here. It always is a really nice moment too when you can actually pass down some wisdom that you've picked up, and some advice with someone else who's just starting out and feeling like they are a little bit of an imposter. To bring it back to Miss Sally, who wrote the article for us about her imposter syndrome experience. Literally yesterday morning at training, Sal was there helping one of the other girls, Tian, who was using cleats for the first time. So before the training session had started, she was in the car park trying to figure out how the clip in, clip out motion works. And Sally was there showing her how it was done, giving us some tips, which was fantastic to see. And I just think it's an amazing example of someone who has experienced feeling like an imposter, being such a valuable member of the group, and imparting some triathlon knowledge to someone else who is new to the sport and is probably feeling a little bit out of her depth too. Okay, a bit of a long one today, but that is everything from me. I hope you found that somewhat useful. If imposter syndrome is something that you're struggling with, I hope listening to this has reinforced that you are not alone in that experience. It's pretty common, and hopefully some of the things I touched on today help you progress out of it a little bit. If you do have any other advice to share on overcoming imposter syndrome, feel free to pop it in the comments section. I can't see any comments at the moment, so I'm assuming no one's popped any questions in, but if you do have any questions, pop them in the comments and we'll touch on them later. But that's it from me. I hope you all have a fantastic rest of the week, and I will be back on here in 2 weeks' time for another episode of Coffee and Coaching. Have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye.